So, lecture 14, sexual reproduction review quiz. We know why sexual reproduction is so important, but in this, we're going to look at some of the dynamics of things that you may not know, such as the timing of the sexual reproduction cycles that we've talked about. Those are some of the quiz questions. So make sure you know that women will undergo meiosis before they're even born, whereas men won't even begin meiosis until they reach sexual maturity. That's a big offset in when meiosis occurs. Also, that we talked about this where meiosis won't complete until fertilization occurs. So not only does meiosis begin before women are born, but after ovulation, as the egg is going down, if fertilization doesn't occur, meiosis will not complete. And so that's a huge difference because for males, it starts at puberty and it pretty much has to finish before the sperm are viable in order to be involved in sexual reproduction. So that's one thing that is going to be tested on is when sexual reproduction, basically meiosis, when that occurs in humans, because that's not something that generally people understand in their sexual life cycles. Now, some of the questions are going to be on what's happening during the phases of meiosis, but not as much as you would think, like within the case of when we talked about cellular reproduction for mitosis. Now, one question you're going to have will distinguish between sister chromatids and homologous chromosomes. So make sure you understand the difference between those two. Remember, sister chromatids are carbon copies of each other, whereas homologous chromosomes come from each parent. They're the same size, they have the same types of genes on them, but they don't have the same alleles. That's something that's critical to understand, is that alleles are just mutations in the same coding region of the genes that give the variation. Red hair, brown hair, blonde hair, all types of hair, all types of eye color, height, immune system, everything. All the variation you see are mutations in these genes, and we all have the same genes. We just don't have the same version of those genes. That's what alleles are. Some of the questions you're going to get are primarily focused on when genetic recombination occurs, such as in prophase 1 is when crossing over occurs, or metaphase 1 when independent assortment occurs, or when fertilization occurs, right? For males, it occurs after meiosis is over. For females, it's right in the middle of metaphase 2. And so fertilization can occur at different times in meiosis depending upon whether you're male or female. Also, make sure you know that you can define crossing over and that you can define independent assortment. Those are questions that will come up on the exam. You also need to know when certain things like non-disjunction occur. We talked about that, anaphase 1 or anaphase 2. So those are a lot of the questions on what's happening during the phases. You're not going to have too many questions on, what's going on in telophase 1 or telophase 2 or metaphase 2 and all that. It's more things like when errors happen or when genetic recombination actually occurs. Those are where those questions are going to focus on. You will have questions on the difference between monozygotic and dizygotic twins. So do make sure you understand the difference between those. You will have several questions on non-disjunction. So make sure you understand when it occurs and what the outcomes are, such as an extra chromosome 21 causing Down syndrome, or an extra chromosome X causing triple X syndrome, or Klinefelter's or Jacobs or Turner syndrome. You're not going to have to define these syndromes, but I am going to use them as examples of non-disjunction. Turner syndrome would be an example of monosomy. Jacobs, Klinefelter's, triple X are examples of trisomy, just like Down syndrome is an example of trisomy. And that brings up the bar body. I'll use that when I'm asking what's not an example of non-disjunction, because I'll use all these others as examples of what happens when non-disjunction occurs. But a bar body, remember, these are in women or men with Klinefelter syndrome, but generally women. When you have two X chromosomes, you inactivate one of them. It's still there, but it's inactive. So it's not non-disjunction because you still have the chromosome there. You just only have 45 active chromosomes. And so this is not an example of non-disjunction. So that will show up on one possible quiz question as well. So generally, most of the questions will be on when this sexual recombination occurs, crossing over, when this occurs, independent assortment. But some of them are here and there. What's the difference between sister chromatids and homologous chromosomes? Or when does meiosis occur in men and women? Things like that. And so there are a lot of things to make sure that you have covered, but generally that should get you through quiz 14.